Megan finally got her MasterChef moment tonight, and it went about as smoothly and spontaneously as these things always do, meaning not very. But that is only where today starts, because the Daily Beast is out with a takedown of the family's picture-perfect holiday photos that lines up terribly with the sob story everyone was fed last week. And Fleet Street itself is warning the palace not to fall for the sausage's next move, and there's a sharp contrast doing the rounds between the king's decorum and his son's podcast choices, and Fergie's charity has quietly closed its doors for good. Welcome back, my Royal Rogues. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the Royal Rogue. Let's get down to it. So, MasterChef. The episode landed on Channel 10 tonight, and the royalty fight everyone was told never happened turned out to be baked directly into the format. Contestants on tonight's Season 18 premiere were handed a challenge to cook something fit for a duchess. In those exact words, the same phrase Meghan's own camp had reportedly tried to keep out of her introduction days ago. Yeah, so much for that denial holding up past the opening credits. Then, in the middle of the judging, a producer walked over to Meghan holding a phone, and Howie turned out to be on the other end, calling in to check on her. Meghan lit up for the cameras, announced to the room that her husband was on the line, and spent the next stretch walking him through the contestants' dishes while he admired the studio chandeliers and asked, in a tone built for television, whether he'd interrupted anything important. She told him about a hot sauce she loved, warned him it might be too spicy for his taste, and mentioned he was elsewhere with the military veterans while she finished the tasting. He signed off with a wave and a line about not wanting to keep her from the food. The room applauded on cue, and Meghan turned to the judges to declare him a charmer. It played to anyone watching with their eyes open, like a segment blocked out in advance rather than spontaneous surprise. And the reaction online backs it up. Plenty of viewers reach for words like scripted and cringe within minutes of it airing, questioning why a cooking competition needed a celebrity phone call at all. But here's the detail that tells you how far in advance this was managed. Weeks before the episode even aired, a former MasterChef post-producer went on TikTok describing exactly how lovely and low-key Meghan had supposedly been on set. Straight from a current crew member she texted for the goss. Nice to the crew, charming on the phone with her husband, charming enough that producers were reportedly getting her for free since the whole cameo was filmed back in April during the couple's actual working trip to Australia. So that's a lot of charm to have lined up and ready to deploy 2 months before a single frame of the actual broadcast. So yeah, call her methane if you want the shorthand, but what happened here was a charm campaign that started well before the premiere date and ended with a scripted phone call, getting a standing ovation from people who were being filmed the whole time. Yeah, once the call wrapped up, Meghan settled back into the judging panel alongside Sophia Levin, Pauline Yeo, and Jean-Christophe Novelli, and fielded a few questions about cooking for her own family that sounded rehearsed enough to have been workshopped on the flight over. So Archie and Lily, she said, are great eaters who love Brussels sprouts and jump in to help in the garden. Harry, apparently, is a meat and potatoes and cream sauce man thanks to his British upbringing, while she leans toward grilled meats, fish, and citrus. Family time, she added, is really about connecting through food, so they cook together as often as they can. It's a lovely answer. delivered with the polish of someone who, yeah, but she knew the question was coming. And meanwhile, the same week that charm offensive hit air, the Daily Beast was busy pulling apart the family's holiday highlight reel, and the contrast is not flattering. Columnist Tom Sykes, writing for The Royalist, laid the timeline out plainly. Last week, people around the couple were telling reporters how brutal the security fight with the British government had gotten. A fight serious enough that a source described Harry as close to tears on the phone, all right, and serious enough that Meghan's own camp told People magazine she was left saddened by how the whole thing played out. Then, within days, out comes a golden, sun-drenched Instagram carousel of the same family looking like they hadn't a worry in the world. So Sykes made the point most of us already suspected. Harry barely appears with the children for large stretches of that footage, which isn't exactly the picture of the hands-on family holiday it's been sold as. And somewhere in the middle of all that curated joy sits a procession down an avenue at Althorpe to lay flowers on Diana's grave, presented with the same breezy caption energy as the beach shots, a sunset snap of Archie, and the fish restaurant dinner, as if grief and an European getaway belong in the same scroll. So Sykes even reached for a French philosopher to make the point, something about images eventually floating free of reality altogether. So you don't need the philosophy degree to get there. You only need a pair of eyes. Because you can't have it both ways. Either the security situation was dire enough to leave a grown man in tears on the phone, or it was relaxed enough to produce a fortnight of sun-kissed content. So the more likely read is that the difficulty was always going to be whatever got the most useful headline that week. Last week, it was useful to look besieged. This week is useful to look serene. And it's not like the two storylines happened by accident either. The same calendar week, her team was quietly shaping how a cooking show cameo would land. Her Instagram account was busy shaping an entirely separate narrative about a peaceful family holiday. Yeah, we're talking about the same people on the same week, and neither story particularly interested in matching up with the other. And while all that was unfolding online, Fleet Street had its own warning ready, and this one was aimed at the palace, not at the sausages. The Daily Mail Royals editor Rebecca English went on the paper's own Palace Confidential show over the weekend and said, in effect, that the palace needs to recognize the recent tea at Highgrove could end up being used as a stepping stone. Her argument was that Charles finally seen Archie and Lily in person after 4 years, however innocent on its own, risks being interpreted down the line as the opening move in a longer campaign to inveigle the family back into a half-in, half-out role. So Diary editor Richard Eden went further on the same panel, pointed out that all the recent talk of Meghan's sadness over the visit traces back to leaks from the couple's own side, not from the palace, which makes that sadness sound a lot like sadness over a story her own camp helped write, then apparently found painful once it started circulating. So that warning lines up neatly with an exclusive from earlier in the week describing the couple's new Portugal home as a bolt hole, I almost pronounced that incorrectly, for more frequent UK trips once the Invictus Games land in Birmingham next year, which makes this look less like a one-off visit and more like a plan with a runway already built. English was careful to say Charles went into that meeting with nothing but good intentions. A grandfather wanted to see his grandchildren, and that part isn't in dispute. What she's flagging is what happens after the good intentions run out, when a quiet family tea gets repackaged months from now as proof the door was always open. And sticking with Richard Eden for a moment, because he also used this week's column to draw the sharpest contrast in the whole story. He described a climate reception at St. James Palace last month, a building with no air conditioning, right in the middle of the heat wave. 250 guests were sweating through it, and the king kept his jacket on, top button fastened, the tie perfectly straight, dabbing his brow with a silk handkerchief, while an aide worked a fan beside him. That's the king's version of visibly struggling in public. Buttoned up, composed, not a hair out of place. And then Eden pivoted straight to Ginger Brad's podcast appearance from a couple of weeks back. You know, the one that came with an actual BBC content warning for strong language and adult humor, where he described his own job as, in effect, Prince of England, a title that hasn't technically existed since 1707, before eventually settling on Duke. The conversation reportedly wandered into territory as niche as body hair grooming habits along the way. I'm not going to elaborate on that. But Eden's framing was blunt. One man held the standard together through a stifling afternoon rather than let it slip. The other needed a warning label before anyone hit play. An unnamed friend of the king told Eden plainly this week that the monarch believes the institution needs to stay dignified. Fair enough. It is a message that clearly is not reaching every branch of the family tree. And finally, tonight, over in Andrew and Fergie's corner of this circus, because a chapter has quietly closed for good. Sarah's Trust, the charity Fergie set up back in 2020 to connect philanthropists with good causes, has now been formally wound up. The Charity Commission's own register list is removed, meaning it no longer exists as a registered charity at all, and confirmed this week after the paperwork finally went through last month. So it's, the quiet final step in a story that started when all emails between Fergie and Jeffrey Epstein surfaced, showing that she stayed in unusually warm, friendly contact with him for years after his conviction. So the fallout had already been brutal before disclosure made it official. The Teenage Cancer Trust dropped her as patron after 35 years attached to the cause. Wiltshire and Dorset's own Julia's House Hospice cut her loose. Prevent Breast Cancer, the Natasha Allergy Research Foundation, and the National Foundation for Retired Service Animals all followed suit. One by one, every organization that once wanted Fergie's name on its letterhead decided the association wasn't worth it anymore, and now her own charity has joined that same list of things that used to exist. Andrew, for his part, already lost his own titles over his own Epstein connections, stripped by the king himself over what the palace called serious lapses of judgment. Fergie has spent months insisting the marriage still works precisely because they are divorced. I don't understand how that works, but okay. Supposedly the happiest divorced couple around, still living under the same Windsor roof by choice, still turning up to the same family Christmases. It's getting harder to see what exactly that convenient arrangement is still protecting, now that the causes she actually built with her own name are the ones quietly paying the price for it. One deregistered charity at a time, while the two people at the center of it keep insisting everything between them is, somehow fine, I guess. So, here's where today actually leaves us. MasterChef cameo dressed up as spontaneous turns out to have been choreographed weeks, maybe even months in advance. The Daily Beast is calling out the gap between last week's sub story and this week's postcard. Fleet Street is telling the Palace to watch its back, and Fergie's charity has now joined the long list of things the Epstein years ended up costing her. So I don't think that FaceTime call was anywhere near as spur of the moment as it played. And I don't think Rebecca English warning gets any less relevant the longer this all runs. But let me know what you think about this in the comments. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the Royal Rogue. Much love and bliss.